I hope you had enjoyed the part 1 of this report. Now I'll bring you the part 2 of 10 of the biggest lies in history. Please stay with us and listen as we take you into a series of the last 5 biggest lies in history. Lie number 6. Titus Oasis and the plot to kill Charles II. By the time he fabricated his notorious plot, Titus Oasis already had a history of deception and general knavery. He had been expelled from some of England's finest schools as well as the Navy. Oasis was even convicted of perjury and escaped imprisonment, but his biggest lie was still ahead of him. Raised Protestant by an Anabaptist preacher, Oasis entered Cambridge as a young man to study for Anglican orders. After misconduct got him dismissed from his Anglican post, he started associating with the Catholic circles and feigned conversion. But the encouragement of fellow anti-Catholic Israel tongue, Oasis infiltrated enemy territory by entering the Catholic seminary. In fact, he entered 2 seminaries, both of which expelled him, but it hardly mattered. By this time, he had gathered enough inside information and named to wreak enormous havoc. In 1678, Oasis concocted and pretended to uncover a plot in which the Jesuits were planning to murder King Charles II. The idea was that they wanted to replace Charles with his Catholic brother, James. What ensued was a 3-year panic that fueled anti-Catholic sentiment and resulted in the execution of about 35 people. After Charles died in 1685, James became king and had Oasis tried for perjury. Oasis was convicted, pilloried, and imprisoned. He only spent a few years in jail, however, as the Glorious Revolution swept through England in 1688 without James in power. Oasis got off with a pardon and a pension. Another big lie is Anna Anderson, alias Anastasia. With the onslaught of the Russian Revolution, the existence of a royal family was intolerable to the Bolsheviks. In 1918, they massacred the royal Romanov family, Caesar Nicholas II, his wife, son, and 4 daughters, to ensure that no legitimate heir could later resurface and rally the public for support. Soon, rumors floated around that certain members of the royal family had escaped and survived. As one might expect, claimants came out of the woodwork, and Anderson was the famous. In 1920, Anderson was admitted to a hospital after attempting suicide and confessed that she was Princess Anastasia, the youngest daughter of the royal family. She stood out from other claimants because she held a certain resemblance to and surprising knowledge of the Russian family and life at court. Although a few relatives of and acquaintances who had known Anastasia believed Anderson, most didn't. But in 1927, an alleged former roommate of Anderson claimed that her name was Franziska Shanzwowska, not Anna, and certainly not Anastasia. This didn't stop Anderson from indulging in celebrity and attempting to cash in on the royal inheritance. She ultimately lost her case in the legal proceedings that dragged on for decades, but she stuck to her story until her death in 1984. Years later, upon the discovery of what proved to be the remains of the royal family, DNA tests confirmed her to be a fake. In 2009, experts were able to finally confirm that all remains have been found and that no family members escaped execution in 1918. Lie number 8 we bring to you is Madoff Ponzi scheme. We'd like you to remember that Bernard Madoff put off the biggest financial scheme in history. When Madoff admitted that his investment scheme was just one big lie, it was an understatement. In 2008, he confessed to having conned about $50 billion from investors who trusted him with their savings. Madoff used the formula of a Ponzi scheme to keep up the fraud for more than a decade. This classic lie is named after the notorious Charles Ponzi, who used the ploy in the early 20th 20th century. It worked like this. A schemer promises investors great returns, but instead of investing the money given to him, he keeps some for himself and uses the funds from new investment to pay off earlier investors. Madoff may not have invented this lie, but he took it to new lengths. For one, he made record amount of money from the scheme, but he was also able to keep it going much longer than most Ponzi schemers. Usually, the scam falls apart quickly because it requires the schemer to constantly find more and more investors. It was also an especially shocking lie because Madoff, as a former chairman of Nasdaq, had been an accomplished and respected expert in the financial field. Compare this to Charles Ponzi, who was a petty ex-con by the time he launched his scheme. And number 9, and Van Meegeren's Vermeer forgeries. With his fake Vermeers like the ones you're seeing in the picture in the video, Van Meegeren disputed expert and made lots of money. This lie resulted from a classic case of wanting to please the critics, and Van Meegeren was an artist who felt underappreciated and thought he could trick art experts into admitting his genius. In the early 20th century, scholars were squabbling about whether the great Vermeer had painted a series of works depicting biblical scenes. Van Meegeren pounced on this opportunity and set to work carefully, forging one such disputed work, The Disciples at Emmaus. With tireless attention to detail, he faked the crack and aged hardness of a centuries-old painting. He intentionally played on the confirmation bias of critics who wanted to believe that Vermeer painted these scenes. It worked. Experts hailed the painting as authentic, and Van Meegeren made out like a bandit, producing and selling more fake Vermeers. Greed apparently overcame his desire for praise, as he decided not to out himself. However, Van Meegeren, who was working in the 1930s and 40s, made one major mistake. He sold a painting to a prominent member of the Nazi Party in Germany. After the war, Alias considered him a conspirator for selling a national treasure to the enemy. In a curious change of events, Van Meegeren had to paint for his freedom in order to help prove that the painting was no national treasure. He forged another in the presence of authorities. He escaped with a life sentence of 1 year in prison, but Van Meegeren died of a heart attack 2 months after his trial. The number 10th lie this time is the Trojan Horse. Now, we know this story is very popular out there, and oftentimes it's being used for illustrative purposes. Now, if all is fair in love and war, this might be the most forgivable of the big lies in history. When the Trojan Paris absconded with Helen, wife of the Spartan king, war exploded. It had been raging for 10 long years when the Trojans believed they had finally overcome the Greeks. Little did they know that the Greeks had another trick up their sleeves. In a stroke of genius, the Greeks built an enormous wooden horse with a hollow belly in which men could hide. After the Greeks convinced their foes that this structure was a peace offering, the Trojans happily accepted it and brought the horse within their fortified city. That night, as the Trojans slept, Greeks sitting inside snuck out of the trapdoor. Then they proceeded to slaughter and decisively defeat the Trojans. This was unquestionably one of the biggest and most successful tricks known to history. That is, if it's true. Homer mentions the occurrence in the Alias, and Virgil extrapolates the story in the Aeneid. Evidence suggests that Troy itself existed, giving some validity to Homer's tales, and scholars have long been investigating how historically accurate these details are. One theory behind the Trojan Horse comes from historian Michael Wood, who proposes that it was merely a battering ram in the shape of a hawk that infiltrated the city. In any case, the story has won a permanent place in the Western imagination as a warning to beware of enemies bearing gifts. Thank you so much for listening and for watching our video, 10 of the greatest lies in history. We hope you've enjoyed all we have brought to you so far. We urge you to please browse through our channel, and you can view other useful videos in our channel. And most importantly, don't forget to share our videos with friends on all social networking, with friends and family, if you really enjoy them and really want them to see it. Thanks.